Okay, guys, I am joined by the man that's usually behind the camera, Neil Lewis, which I'm delighted to say Neil's one of our Connect coordinators on our coordinator team that oversee Connect across our sites. And we're just going to have a chat today around what Connect is, why we do it. Neil, from just chatting with Neil and hearing his heart, I think you actually capture the heart of Connect so well. So there's some things that we have to talk through today. You'll hear the language around Connect. We say it's a spiritual practice of community, committing to a small group of people for the purpose of formation into Christ likeness. That's great. I mean, that's lovely language. But what we want to do is unpack what that actually means today. So thanks for being here. Thanks for doing this because I know you feel more comfortable on the other side of the camera. So,
You've no idea.
so Neil, let's just start. Like, what is Connect? What can we start to unpack there?
Well, I suppose the easiest way to describe Connect is that it's fundamentally just the way that we meet midweek in smaller numbers and smaller groups. And it looks like all kinds of things. So it can look like a Bible study. It can look like going through the Sunday sermon. I'm digging in a little bit deeper. It can be going through a course of some description. I know one of our Connects has done a marriage course together, which has just been fantastic. So it can look like anything, but the fundamental point of the whole thing is that it's about formation, it's about discipleship, and it's about becoming like Jesus together.
Yeah, and we have to do that together, right? Like we can't just do that by ourselves, which I know we're going to get into a little bit today. But like, why do we do it? Like what's
Well, um, I suppose it's about two things. There's a bit in Second Corinthians which is about being formed into the likeness of Christ, and that's an ongoing thing. It's not just you are formed into the likeness of Christ. And we've got this other passage, well, in Matthew, I think it is, where Jesus says, "Go and make disciples of all nations." And again, we quite often equate that with go and make Christians of all nations. So it's like once we've got them over the door, over the threshold, salvation, then we go, well, job's done. But in actual fact, when we look at discipleship and what that actually means, what that meant when Jesus was talking about it back in ancient biblical times, wasn't it about? It was a whole bigger, much bigger thing, where it was about becoming like your teacher. So teachers would have had disciples, and it's an intentional apprenticeship, I suppose, is probably the easiest way to describe it, where the disciple or the apprentice would spend time with the rabbi as much as they could, do the things they did, try and become like them. So the aim of it was an intentional apprenticeship to become a living copy of the master, become as much like them as possible. So it was almost indistinguishable. And there's this great phrase that they used to use back in those times, where you would be covered in the dust of your rabbi. The idea being you walk so closely with them, you're just covered in their dust because you can't get out of that. And I think that still carries on to where we are now. So when Jesus said, "Make disciples of all nations," that's what he's talking about. It's not just about learning things. It's not about knowing something. It's not about just salvation. Stop. It's about becoming as much like Jesus as you can, becoming as much like our Master as we can.
so just let's recap that, because even that as a concept is sometimes new. Is that our relationship with Jesus is about who we are becoming. We're
Yeah,
becoming like him, so we are imitating him, following him, and there's so many different ways
yeah,
to do that. But the main and primary way we're doing that is through Connect Group. Is
yeah.
that what we're saying?
Well, I think that has to be our fundamental thing. Um, the reason being it's community, and that's the way Jesus lived. And if we go back even to Genesis, where uh, God is he exists in community. Father, Son, and Spirit exists in community. He said in Genesis 2 that is not good for the man to be alone. And we are created in God's image, so we're created for community, and that's the way it is. And when we look at Jesus throughout the Gospels, he was always with people. He lived in community. He spent time with people, eating dinner, at a table, around a table, speaking with people. He was always with people. I mean, obviously he did take time away. He did spend time on his own. And I think that's really the model that we need to look at. I think it's said quite often that there are three parts to discipleship and what that looks like for us now. And it's spend time with Jesus, become like Jesus and do what he did, or maybe better said, do what he would do if he were me.
Yeah.
Which I guess goes back to that kind of early 2009, 1990s
What
thing
would
of
Jesus
what
do?
would Jesus do?
Yeah.
Well,
Except, what would he do if he was
if he
you?
were me, yeah.
Yeah, because that creates, I guess, almost a separation of like Jesus is over there, I'm over here. No, he's actually, now we're becoming like him. So we
Exactly,
want our thoughts, our motivations to be aligned with his. Okay, so formation, we're being formed. Yeah, like talk to us. I love what you share about diversity and the importance of diversity in community and different elements like that. Because, I mean, how are we formed in community? Like, what does that look
Well,
like?
I think it's interesting to think about those three things and how they actually function, because to spend time with Jesus, I can do that on my own, and I'll be straight up. I like spending time on my own. I'm happy on my own. I am happy with my own company. So quite often spending time with people is an effort for me, because I like being on my own. I guess in some ways I'm an introvert,
Yeah.
not necessarily the classic kind of full-on introvert, but I am introverted
Which is
in some way, shape, or form.
probably, it's one of the things I love about you, and it affirms for me the beauty of community about how you've discovered this, because you could spend all your time by yourself.
Oh yeah. And I can spend time with Jesus, and I can probably ultimately start to do some of the things that he would do if he were me.
Yeah.
But that middle section of becoming like Jesus, you can't do that on your own, because he exists in community. He spent all his time in community, and there's so much throughout the New Testament, which is fundamentally our discipleship handbook. It's our manual. How do we do this? It's kind of laid out for us if we go looking for it. And there's this great word in Greek, which I'm not going to try and pronounce, which means to each other or one another or reciprocally or mutually. So it's those things of each other, and it appears over 100 times in the New Testament, and I think over 50 is maybe 60 or so of those times they're purely specifically about how we function in relationship, how we relate to each other. And so you've got things, I'm just going to read a couple of them here. You've got love one another, be devoted to one another, honor one another, build up one another, accept one another, care for one another, serve one another, bear one another's burdens, be patient with one another, speak the truth in love, speak to one another with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. So all of these things, and as I say, it appears over 100 times, 69 times in this kind of context. And there are some other ones as well, which are negative ones, the opposite of that. So do not lie to one another. So there's both sides of it. And if we want to become like Jesus, basically our manual is saying love one another. We can't love one another if I'm on my own.
Yeah.
And I think when you spoke about diversity and sort of, I guess, we talk quite a lot about multi-generational, but I think it probably goes beyond that, so it's multi-generational, multicultural, multi-experience, whatever that looks like. Multi-stages, all of those things. And, we need to be careful, because our propensity, our natural tendency is to seek out people who are like us. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with spending time with people who are like us. But if we are to be formed with the concept, even if you just take one of love one another, it's easy for me to love you because we're quite similar. I mean, we do have perhaps different experiences, but we're quite similar. Yeah. But when you throw into the mix, so if I was just to hang around with people who are 50-ish years old, married, teenage kids, brought up in church, who share so many life experiences with me, it's easy, and there's no challenge there. And I think formation comes probably at its deepest when you're challenged in your thinking and your opinions. But when you throw into the mix maybe a single parent and somebody who's in their 20s, somebody who is in their 80s, or a couple in their 80s, grandparents, parents, people who are from other countries, different backgrounds, were not brought up in church. I was brought up in church. When you start to put all of those things into the mix, then we have to set aside our preferences. When we enter that space, we need to go, well, I suppose there's a bit of denying yourself. It's like, well, these are my preferences, but they're literally just preferences, and we need to focus on our commonality. And what is our commonality? It's Jesus. Jesus is that is who we have in common, and we want to become like him. So we set those things aside and we go, well, tell me about your experience. Tell me about how you view this thing through the lens of all of your experiences. And I'll share with you how I see it through the lens of my experiences, and we'll figure out together what that really looks like, what Jesus would do, and how then we can carry that into all the spaces and places that we occupy.
There's a couple of things I'm thinking of as you're saying that. Firstly, if you think about the 12 disciples around Jesus and how different they were. Yes, all Jewish, but you have the zealot, you have the tax collector, you have the fisherman. Like, you have such a diverse group of people. The second thing I would say is, from my experience, when that is your experience of the spiritual practice of community, actually what starts to happen is you go, oh my goodness, this is unbelievable. When people create that, where Jesus is actually at the center of it, and your relationships have been forged around him and his formation, it is quite stunning. Like, it's quite beautiful.
It's incredible, and there's another beautiful element to it, I suppose, where we talk about lots of things. You know, if you take face value of, if we were talking about connect groups, we would say, well, what are they for? They're, where we care for each other, where we figure things out together, where we learn together, and all of those things are true. But I think when you orientate yourselves around the purpose of becoming like Jesus, and we go down those things of loving one another, honoring one another, serving one another, all of those things just happen naturally. So it's not like we meet together and the point is, well, today we're going to talk about whatever you're going through. That's not the point. We just start to love each other and care for each other, and it's a natural way to behave. And then suddenly you realize, oh, actually, I've taken another step in my formation and becoming more like Jesus. How I am behaving is changing, and it's an incremental thing, and it will last the entirety of our lives, I suppose. But the thing that goes hand in hand with that, with diversity, in that group, is the fact that the reality is, when I arrive with some scenario or some situation that I'm dealing with, the likelihood is somebody else in that group has already gone through it. So if we have somebody who is perhaps divorced, or somebody who has been widowed, or somebody who's lost somebody really close to them, or whatever that might look like that I'm going through, if we include this completely diverse range of people in all of our groups, then somebody there will be able to come alongside me, or you, or whoever, and walk you through that, because they've already been there. They've walked that path and can take you through there.
It is beautiful, mate. Thank you for that. Thank you for your willingness to lean into community, despite not necessarily being naturally inclined toward it, because I think you've uncovered something beautiful in that. Is there anything else before we finish? Is there anything else you feel like it would be helpful for people as either they're facilitating connect groups or they're thinking about starting one? Is there anything else you think would be helpful to hear?
I think primarily our objective always has to be that thought of, well, what would Jesus do if he was trying to do this now? If he was trying to gather community, if he was trying to impart what he was trying to teach, what he was hoping we would learn, how would he orientate things? And I think one of the things that's really interesting to think about, perhaps, is a lot of his interactions where there was major formation, where there was major change in people, was around a table and eating. So I think there's something in there to think about, and also persistence. It's like you meet together with a group of people who are massively diverse. It's going to be challenging. It is going to be challenging. But as we said earlier, perhaps the place of deepest formation is the place of deepest challenge. And so it's worth pushing through, because we need, I suppose, while there are definite positive social benefits to coming together, you can make friends and all of those things. The primary purpose is about becoming like Jesus.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. I don't want to cut you off there. You can say
No,
it
it's
again.
fine, 100%.
Man, thank you. Bless you guys. Thank you so much
Thank you.
for checking us out, and hope you can check out some of our other videos.